So this is the first development talk that I'm going to give on the road to Edinburgh on August the 12th. And I'm going to call these the AC tapes because I'm in Greece and it's too hot in the afternoons to go outside and talk. I'd like to be talking in a park, but it's too hot to do that, so I'm inside with the AC on. And yes, I'm going to talk about the things I think that are going to be in my show on the 12th, but we'll see. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is chicken soup. I was reading this book a while ago by a chap called Robert Dilts, who's an advocate of something called neuro-linguistic programming. Not necessarily a big advocate of neuro-linguistic programming myself, can't even say it. But there was an interesting idea in that, or I had an interesting realization as a result of doing one of the exercises that he advocates in his book, Sleight of Mind. He was asking people to talk about, asking people to think about the difference between things that are real and things that are just ideas. Now, obviously, this is a really important thing for project management because project management is about bringing things into reality. And so he was saying, well, think of something that is real, that really happened, and think of something that didn't happen. When I do this as a training course, what I tend to do is I tend to say, keep those two things about the same level of ordinariness. So like if the thing that really did happen is that you drove to work by car, don't make the thing that didn't happen that you arrived at work by jetpack. Keep those two things at a similar level of ordinariness. So maybe we're thinking one is you arrived at work by car and the other one is you arrived by bike, and one is true and one's not. What's the difference between those two things? And so the examples that I took were, I just had my lunch, so I thought, okay, well, the thing I had for lunch was chicken soup. I had a tin of chicken soup for lunch, and what's the thing of a similar level of ordinariness that I didn't do? Well, I could have had a bacon sandwich. I really like bacon sandwiches, but I didn't have a bacon sandwich. And then I was thinking, well, what's the difference between these two things? What's the difference between the thing that I did do, which was I ate chicken soup, and the thing that I didn't do, having a bacon sandwich? And I had this revelation, which I think is a really important revelation. The difference between the two was that I'd spilt the chicken soup on my shirt. The real thing, in the real case, part of the reason I knew it had happened was because something had gone wrong. And this really connects with an important aspect of project management that people don't really talk about very much, which is that when you try and do things, when you try and bring things into reality, then things go wrong. And one of the ways that I've tried to gloss this, and when I've been writing about it just recently in my book, is that projects are engines of embarrassment and fear, especially for the people who are responsible for them from a management point of view, the bosses. When a project is actually doing things, it will be like the chicken soup. Chicken soup will get spilt on the shirt. When a project is actually doing things, it will generate questions that are embarrassing because you don't know the answers. It will generate things that go wrong. So kind of like the technology that you thought you were going to be able to use doesn't work. It'll do all of those things. Projects are engines of fear and embarrassment. That's not something you can stop. That's a really important thing to understand. You can't stop projects being frightening and embarrassing and disturbing. What you have to do is you have to somehow engineer your response to them so that it isn't something that causes the project's damage. So the typical kind of response to kind of like embarrassment and fear coming from projects is to either not listen or shoot the messenger. Both of those are very bad ideas because whatever it is in that project that's causing fear and embarrassment Those are the things that that project needs to solve if it's going to have any chance of being a success. Now, in trying to fix this, in trying to kind of get a good picture of what is going on in a project, then there are some things that you really need to bear in mind. And one of those is that, yes, obviously, bosses will avoid, naturally, subconsciously, they will avoid fear and embarrassment. And the second thing is that the people who are in those projects, who are typically kind of like lower down the hierarchy than you are, they're going to avoid, or they're going to try and avoid, frightening you and embarrassing you if you're the boss, because they naturally know that it's not a good idea to frighten and embarrass people who are more senior than they are. And actually, this has got a name. This business of communication up and down the hierarchy being broken has got a name. It's called the SNAFU principle, after a writer called Robert Anton Wilson. And SNAFU, apologies, I did say there'd be some swearing in this show. SNAFU means situation normal, all fucked up. And what's fucked up is that the higher up the hierarchy you go, and the bigger the disparity between the status of the two people in the hierarchy, the less likely it is that there'll be any honest communication about what's actually going on. And this is really, really important for project management, because somehow we need to figure out how we can fix this, at least for the duration of the project, or at least to some degree. And so situation normal, all fucked up is a sweary acronym. But there's another kind of there's another thing in the kind of like popular culture which really describes that, and describes this. And that's the story of the Emperor's New Clothes. So the story of the Emperor's New Clothes by Hans Christian Andersen is that there is an emperor. He's very, very interested in clothes. He's very interested in sartorial elegance. And a couple of men come to his country, and they tell him that they've got the finest cloth that has ever been woven. And they say that this cloth is so fine that stupid people can't see it at all. Stupid, ignorant people, or people who aren't any good at their jobs, can't see it at all. And the emperor's very excited by this, because he wants the absolute finest cloth that can possibly be bought. And so he gives these two men some bags of gold to weave the cloth. And then they come back after a while and they say, we've woven the cloth. And they show him the cloth. There's nothing there, but the emperor is worried that if he says that there's nothing there, then he's going to look foolish. And then they say, well, if you want us to cut a suit of clothes from this cloth, then you're going to have to pay some more money. You're going to have to pay some more gold, and we'll tailor a suit. And so the long story short is that the emperor ends up wearing this suit, in inverted commas, in public, and all of his courtiers have been appraised of the idea that only stupid people think that there's no cloth there, and only people who are no good at their job think there's no cloth there. The emperor gets quite excited at this. He thinks that if anybody points out that there's no cloth there, those will be people who are no good at their job, and he can fire them. But of course, the whole thing comes crashing down because one person, one little boy, points out that the emperor isn't wearing any clothes. Now, the interesting thing about this story is how Hans Christian Andersen has to amp up various aspects of the story to make it run and work. It isn't enough for this chap to be a king. He's an emperor. He's got an empire. It isn't enough for him to be an emperor. He's an out-of-touch emperor. He's an emperor who's very, very focused towards his clothes and doesn't really, it says in the story, doesn't really bother going and visiting military installations, doesn't bother going and visiting schools or anything like that. He's focused on schools. So he's not just really, really high status, he's also out-of-touch high status. And the other thing that he does is he makes it so that the con men make it so that anybody who points out this disparity, points out the bad news of the emperor being naked, will be seen as being stupid and also possibly lose their job. So basically, what Hans Christian Andersen is doing, because he's trying to find drama, is he's artificially increasing all these things. And that's a clue to what you need to do if you're going to do the opposite. If you're going to try and improve communication between people in a hierarchy, what you need to do is you need to some degree lower the status of the emperor. Now, that doesn't mean overall lower the emperor's status, but just in the discussions that matter around this project. It's not naked emperor project, it's the software development project. Just in the discussions that matter around this project, you need to try and lower the status. And one of the ways of doing this might be to have these meetings, to have these briefings one-on-one, so that you're not embarrassed about what's going on. Another thing is for the emperor, or the person who's the boss in this situation, to not be so out of touch, to be more interested in what's going on in his organisation. Part of what's very often going on that's struggling with the project is that generally, so for example, one of the things I bring out as a kind of bad news item that needs to be communicated in projects is that the Wi-Fi doesn't work. There have been some recent cases of, I think it was Google insisting that their employees come back to work, and then it turned out that the Wi-Fi didn't work. So that kind of thing is something that if the emperor isn't completely otherworldly and is aware of what's going on in his organisation, he might know about. And then the final thing is to reduce the dangers of pointing things out that the emperor either doesn't know or only suspects. So if we take away this idea that like people who point something out and disagree with the emperor are stupid people who aren't any good at their job, then if the con men didn't build that in right at the beginning of the story, then there wouldn't be any chance. There would be a far better chance of like actual proper communication happening in that organisation. So to summarise, we've got projects are engines of bad news and embarrassment. The way we organise ourselves in a hierarchy from both ends is to minimise reporting of bad news and embarrassment. And if we want to make projects a success, we have to do something about that. We have to, in these particular situations, lower the status of the senior people, make them senior people more aware of the kinds of things that go on in their organisation, and make the dangers of pointing things out that might not be the thing that everybody else is saying less dangerous. Don't shoot messengers. And this is an easy thing to say, but there's a in kind of project management of software development, there are a couple of other kind of strategies. Basically, it's fine saying don't shoot messengers, but another thing you can do is you can hire smart, brave messengers. And actually, in software development, there are two kinds of smart, brave messengers, at least, that you need to hire. You need to hire a project manager who is somebody who's willing to point out to you fundamental problems with the project, like the Wi-Fi not working, or the timeline that you're talking about not being possible, or the technology that you're talking about using not actually working. So he's somebody who's really concerned with doing the project right. And then you need to hire somebody else who is another kind of brave, smart messenger, who is somebody who's the product owner. And the product owner is interested in not doing the project right, but doing the right project, putting the right things in this project so that people will want to actually use it. And also, as part of this, making decisions, being willing to make decisions on your behalf, or be willing to shape up the decisions into several options so that it's easy for you to choose. So you need these two kinds of people. You need these two kinds of smart, brave messengers in your organization if you're to have a chance of dealing with the fact that all projects are engines of problems and fear and embarrassment, and that all human organisations tend to minimise the reporting of problems, fears and embarrassment.